Great. So welcome to this session about conservation trust funds. The core of the session will be an evaluation. Just letting time to some people to put the the headsets. The core of the session will be the evaluation commissioned by AFD and FFEM of their support to conservation trust funds over the years. Since 2005, I think, AFD and FFEM have supported conservation trust funds, be it through endowments, through projects, supporting specific budget lines of the Secretariat of Trust Funds, but also, and that's important, with non-financial contribution, accompanying the trust funds with staff time and expertise, for instance, sitting on the board of some of the trust funds. So there is a huge wealth of knowledge at AFD and FFEM, which is worth learning from, and that's what happened. And this learning go way beyond just the framework of AFD and FFEM. So that's why I'm here. As you know, I'm not with FFEM or AFD. I'm with MAVA Foundation. But MAVA Foundation, we have a long history of working with AFD and FFEM with conservation trust funds, a long and happy history, which will end very soon. But not because of this evaluation, because MAVA is closing in a few years, as most of you know. That's another story. So I had the honor to head the advisory board, the steering committee of this evaluation, and that's why I'm here. The steering committee included a representative from the different departments of AFD and FFEM, the ministries, but also external stakeholders like KFW, WWF, and MAVA Foundation. And I think that's a good illustration on that AFD and FFEM realize that the impact of this evaluation goes way beyond their own institution. Conservation trust funds are not new, but they are unique in the amounts they mobilize and also in their long-term vision. And in the mix of solutions that we need to fund nature conservation, they play a very unique role. And you just have to see the number of sessions here at the Congress who mentioned conservation trust funds to see that this is a very, very dynamic sector. Trust funds have proven to be relevant and effective as a sustainable financing mechanism, but we see that the biodiversity challenge we face today require a huge ambition and a huge leapfrogging in scale, increasing of scale. So conservation trust funds are more than endowments. Donors do more than writing checks. And I think that in this space that we have scope for innovation and improving the situation. Just the last word to say that the ambition was ambitious, very ambitious. And in a period of COVID, it became suddenly even more difficult. So it requires a lot of flexibility and adaptability. I want to thank all the trust funds and the consultants to have been flexible and been able to deliver this evaluation. So without further ado, I pass the mic to Claire from AFD, the Evaluation Department.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, so I am Claire Cogoluènhes from the AFD Evaluation Department, and I was in charge of coordinating this work with other colleagues, Sylvène in particular, who is attending the session. This work was quite important for AFD and I think also for the FFEM, as we are in a context where new sources of financing, sustainable financing, have to be found for biodiversity. And this work is actually the first evaluation that AFD conducted on the conservation trust funds. The specificity of the evaluation is that it had a quite large scope, as it covers a period of 15 years, and also it covered the 8 conservation trust funds that have been supported by the AFD and the FFEM. One other specificity for this evaluation is that we try to have 2 levels of analysis. The first one was at the funds level, where we try to have a comparative approach between the 8 funds. And we also have conducted a specific focus on AFD and the FFEM supports. As Thierry said, it was a very collective work, as many people from AFD and from the FFEM were involved, and in particular the operational teams. But this work also involved many people outside AFD and the FFEM. We were very pleased to work with the MAVA Foundation, and that Thierry Renaud accepted to be the chairman of our steering committee. And we have also worked quite closely with the KfW, as we have conducted a joint evaluation of the MARF fund. As regard the methodology, we faced a lot of challenges, as Thierry said, because we had to cancel the field missions. And so it was quite a challenge to be able to conduct the evaluation in that conditions. And we really thank every people involved for their flexibility and availability, and in particular the funds that have been very involved in the evaluation. Just one last word to say that the evaluation is currently being finalized, and that the report will be available in November. It will be published on the AFD website. We have a specific page on evaluation, so you will find the report and the summary on this page. And I want to thank the CFA for having given us the opportunity to present this work at the Congress. And I give you the floor, Benjamin and David, to start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. So I'm David de Montbrison, and Benjamin Landreau worked on this study with Béatrice Deabreu from BRL Engineering, as well as Cathy Mikitin. So thank you for all of them also for all the work done. So starting from the methodology, we developed a methodology as said by Claire, a comparative analysis of the CTFs, as well as work on AFD role. The team was also supported by local consultant. And we used, of course, different questionnaire and the common matrix to work on the 8 CTF. And the questionnaire was targeted and interviews to the CTF managers and the boards, also the PA institution and the asset managers, and also the donors, as well as institution in charge of PAs. The limits of our evaluation has to be considered. We are only working with 8 funds. So it's a high diversity of trust funds, and also a small sample size, which leads to different difficulties in conclusion, but also very interesting element. We have really a broad geographic scope with AFD FFEM supporting 8 CTF, first in Africa and then in Central America and Mediterranean. We have 6 nationals and 2 regional CTF among them. 3 were dedicated to and are dedicated to coastal and marine topics and area, and the FFEM supported in particular Red Lac and Café, as well as other funds. In total, 88 PA beneficiaries from the CTFs were concerned during these 15 years of AFD FFEM contribution. AFD FFEM becomes now the second donor for this CTF, with 70 million euro earmarked to the CTF and the PA connected, and 55 million targeted to endowment. The specificity of the French endowment funding is that almost half of it is coming from French debt swap mechanism. Then we rapidly present you some elements on the maturity of the funds that we were working on. Most of them are mature, except, of course, the Med Fund that is very recent and Guinea that is facing some difficulties. It's a long process from creation to finance diversification. Takes a decade, and you have different dynamism among these CTF with some delays that cannot be, we cannot escape, like 3 to 4 years between the setting up of a CTF up to the first revenue coming from the endowment. You have also the genesis period before the legal creation, and AFD supported in all the steps a strong involvement in AFD FFEM in the genesis period before the legal creation that takes something like 1 to 3 years, but also in the innovation aspect. And you see that most of the CTF developed, that were supported, developed different finance innovation in different topics. And so the support of the AFD FFEM was not only finance, like said Thierry, but also non-financial support on innovation, on advocacy, on governance, and support in creation of tools. Now I pass so this is more or less of the scope of the CTF, and I pass to Benjamin for the governance and the rest.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. So I don't know if we have some extra headsets, but I think some people are looking for some headsets.
What we've done before is you just hold the microphone down and speak really loudly.
Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, okay, thank you.
But don't speak really loudly right close.
All right, okay. Okay, so good afternoon again. So governance and operations. So we've been analyzing the 8 CTF. Ah oui, merci. From the according to the standards of practice of Conservation Finance Alliance. The standards, we used the former version of the standards because a new version was published after we started the work. So nevertheless, we came to some interesting conclusions. So mostly 85% of the standards overall are actually complied, and so it's a great achievement for most of the CTF with the FPRCE right at the bottom at 99%, for instance, and it's a great tool and widely used by the CTF. And mostly efforts have to be made on resource mobilization. This was really clear, and also on governance. So next slide. So regarding analysis of financial aspects, which is always something very important for everyone, the capitalization level at the end of 2019, so almost a bit less than 2 years ago. So on top, it's in euro, and this one in dollars. So for different funds. So for instance, the FTNS, which is the trust fund of covering Trinational de la Sangha in Cameroon, Congo, Brazzaville, and RCA, Central African Republic. So they reached almost 2 years ago, 60 million, euros. And in dollars, the FFEM, which is in Madagascar with the director, which is here, listening to the presentation, was had reached at the time $75 million. And this chart is also very interesting. It's like the comparison of what each fund has reached against their objective as defined in their strategies. So for 3 of them, they're quite close to their objectives, but we have to say that sometimes those very same objectives are not set according to the needs observed on the field, but according to what the funds think they can reasonably expect from the international community. So there are some flaws also. So the contributions, yes, to the CTF's capital by donor. So in green, dark green is the AFD, Agence Française de Développement, and in the other green is like FFEM. So we can see they are an important donor for most of the 8 CTF that were studied. In orange is the KfW, which is the main donor for the international community of CTF. They remain the most important donor. And the diversification is still missing. For instance, private investors are missing, even if the MAVA Foundation is also in blue, being a private foundation is also an important donor, but nevertheless, the diversity is still missing. That was one of our conclusions also. And then regarding the financial returns and financial ethics, so basically, what we studied here is the investment policies of applied by conservation trust fund. It means they're investing capital into financial markets. So how risky is it? And so overall, they did conservative to moderately conservative investment policies. So, and they were well respected, but they could deserve to be more aggressive. So this is also one of the main conclusions of the CTIS. And we fully agree they could be more aggressive in order for the revenues to be more important. And regarding the level, the financial ethics, so basically, each CTF is establishing a list of exclusion, like some financial products you don't want to invest in, or some sectors, and but they are difficult to implement and to monitor. So we think that the ethical component of investment policies could be improved, mostly by using ESG criteria, which would be easier also for asset manager to follow. So that, and it's not done yet, not much. So that was an important conclusion. So now the numbers. So maybe here's the net returns on average. It's 3.83%. Against an objective of 3.56, so it's expecting meeting the goals that were fixed by each of the CTF. Even if for some funds, for instance the Bacomab, the objective is only at 2.5, which was maybe a rather low objective, like kind of easy to meet. And we also have this nice graph with the CTIS. The CTIS provides each year the average return for the global or network of CTF, at least the one that do answer. And so returns are up to expectations, but maybe not without being maximized. And now we can go to the CTF operating cost. So how much are they very efficient in what they're doing? So maybe next slide, and David, if you don't mind. One more. Thank you. So, most of the CTF have operating costs are steadily decreasing, which is a good sign. And obviously, at the beginning of their life, they have very high operating costs. Like this is the Med Fund, which is a operating cost above 70%, which is normal. But then some of them are below the 20% threshold that we thought was acceptable, and most of them. So it's relatively okay, but some improvement could also be done there. And now the total grants awarded by CTF. So it was 58 million euros awarded between 2008 until 2019. This includes, on the left graph includes projects, so grants from projects plus grants from the endowment. On the right side graph is only from the endowment, keeping in mind that CTF were initially created for the long-term financing of protected areas. So only the right graph actually is meeting with this initial requirement of conservation trust funds. And last year in 2019, around 10 million euros were granted by the 8 CTF subject of this evaluation, to give you an idea. So next slide. So the origin, so we have, this slide is very interesting because in blue, we have the grants from endowment funds, and in kind of yellowish, the grants from projects. And we can see that we have some, for instance, Bacomab in Mauritania is offering 100% of its grants from an endowment fund, when in Biofund, for instance, in Mozambique, or even FTNS, it's mostly coming from projects. So the endowment is not playing such an important role. So maybe those two funds are more like you could be compared to NGOs or implementing agencies, and the specificities of CTF are less visible for those ones than for the ones that are more blue. And so I'll give it over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will focus a little bit on the impacts, because it was a big issue and a big expectation from this evaluation. So we will go on some subject, not all. One of the subjects is to check if the CTF are sufficient to finance the PA network or the PA needs. And when you look at you interview the PA, so it comes out that the CTF were a really important support, even essential, covering most of the recurring cost, operative cost. So in an average on our CTF, it's 30%, but it can reach 100% like in Ivory Coast. But when you look at CTF, and of course at a regional level or at a network, then it's insufficient to cover the needs. And when you look at the same PA, but not looking at the annual planning cost or the annual budget that is really related to pragmatic planning based on what can be obtained, when you look at the optimal management expectations, then you see that CTF meets really only between 10 to 25% of the financial needs. So CTF are convincing tools, but they are not yet scaled to cover really the needs for optimal management of PAs, and it's a big issue, as you can see in this Congress and in the future in the agenda. So some conclusions we present here is mainly on monitoring issues. We saw that there is a difficulty for CTFs to access to national information in order to provide relevant information on biodiversity or other elements. It's mainly also linked with difficulty to have a national monitoring centralization of all the data from the PAs, and the lack of fundings as well. In terms of reporting to donors or in the annual report, what we found that it was a very good communication tools, but with some weaknesses, with uneven level of information provided by the CTF, especially also a lack of continuity in terms of methods. One year you have a type of presentation, another year another type of presentation. And this is matching with the financial aspect, but also with the biodiversity aspect. So the key issue for monitoring is that there is a real need of distribution of role clarification. CTFs are financial tools. There is a big issue to develop contracting agreements between government institutions and the CTFs. In terms of reporting, there are some rooms for improvement in status and evolution of biodiversity conservation. They are not sufficiently covered or not well, the indicators are not well informed in the annual report. In terms of socioeconomic, it's a bigger challenge. It's very complicated. The data is coming from other sources. So for the CTF to present this data is asked by the donors, but it's still a big challenge, especially looking at long-term indicators and specific efforts in terms of gathering the data. In social and environmental safeguard, it becomes more and more an issue. The CTFs are completely aware about this, but on the other hand, the donors, we found the donors, and it shares with some donors, are having a too high level of expectation in terms of type of information and type of reporting. and it has to be adapted to the CTF capacity. The CFA is working on this, has been given some suggestion, and it should be worked in the future between donors and CTF. But we also point out a warning that providing all this data will require more staff, time, with an impact of one of the indicators of performance of the CTF, which is the operating cost. So there is a real need for additional earmark funding for the monitoring at the national levels. There are some work done in the regional in MARFund, but there are really some improvement to be done. And progress also has been shown. This is a positive element on indicators in terms of management efficiency, but to be pursued, there are some work to be done also on this topic. Benjamin again for the conclusion.
Thank you, David. So as you can imagine, it's not very easy to sum up and to the work that was done during this for this evaluation during 18 months. So, and I try to do so in less than 3 minutes. So in a nutshell, the role of the AFD and FFEM has been relevant and pioneering. This is for sure. And the French cooperation is the second largest donor of CTFs that was subject of this study. And there are also very constructive synergies that were observed with the MAVA Foundation, the KfW, which is the German financial cooperation, and sometimes the JEF. So CTF can, importantly also, CTF can provide substantial, stable, and additional funding. So this was to be clarified, and this we came up with this firm conclusion, and to national governments, public allocations to protected areas. So grants awarded are maintained from year to year. So we don't observe a sharp decrease in the grants offered by the CTF, and even increase over time. And no observed, because this was also another concern, no observed withdrawal of national government support for conservation. This was also one of the key questions we had to answer. So nevertheless, CTF spend a lot of energy on international finance aspect, and maybe the pooling, notably of financial services, remains definitely underexploited. So it's been a discussion that has been going on for a long time. The pooling is not that simple. So human resources calibration is also a big issue for CTF, and especially when they increase their activities. So the impact of CTF remain probably not maximized. This is for sure, and difficult to measure. But monitoring is not the exclusive responsibility of conservation trust funds. And the last negative point maybe is the difficulty to leverage funds from the private sector. So there are some good examples, but quite at too low a scale. So now, and it's also kind of the mantra, I think, for this WCC, World Conservation Congress, is the scaling up. The scaling up, we definitely need to scale up. The tool is a good tool, but we need to scale up. So some of the main conclusions of the study, recommendations, sorry. So first, regarding governance, so whether or not donors should be involved in the governance of CTF was a key question, and the answer is it's better to, at least on the medium term, to remain into donor circles, which has no direct intervention regarding the governance. And for the next, the change, we want to change the scale. This is the #1 recommendation. So what we recommend is to substantially increase donor contributions on the medium term, long term, if possible, of course, by widening and also deepening. Widening, like covering more protected areas, and deepening, giving more funds to each single protected area. And further promote financial innovation and also carbon finance, compensation for biodiversity. We really need to innovate more And the Conservation Trust Fund are a great tool, great institutions to allow this innovation to happen, even in difficult contexts, difficult countries, and encourage debt restructuring in favor of conservation, which has been done nicely by the French cooperation with the C2D, le C2D, over the last years, and it should be replicated hopefully by the French, but also by other debt creditors countries. And next, yes. And regarding the measurement of the impact remains difficult, definitely, but fund should definitely finance these aspects too, and also finance the field biodiversity monitoring. It's not always the case, but we definitely recommend them to be more active on that front. So here, yeah, thank you. We try to keep it as short as possible. And I'll give it over to Guillaume Chiron for the AFD speech. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be there, and I've seen many people, partners from, in particular, the Conservation Trust Fund. So thank you to be there for sharing this evaluation. Just to thanks again the consultant, because they did a great job on it. Obviously, because you were in particular the CTF in charge and on board for this evaluation, it was quite important to have your comments and to take into account what you are saying during this evaluation. And why it is quite important to for AFD this evaluation, and also for the French Facility of Global Environment, is because we have to we are all the time challenged for the opportunity to have contribution to Conservation Trust Fund, in particular regarding our supervising ministries. And so we have to prove that it makes sense to invest in Conservation Trust Funds. And so the real good news of this study, of this evaluation, is that the CTF has proven their efficiency, and it's quite important for us because it will be probably one big argument in the coming years to convince again our supervising ministries to say that we will have to continue to invest in CTF because they are able to provide sustainable, stable, and additional funding to supplement national governments for the protection and for the protected areas. And it's the main objective of Conservation Trust Fund. So again, we are very happy with this first conclusion. After that, of course, the CTF has some challenge to scale up, as it has been said by the consultants. I think that the first one is to be able to implement innovative mechanisms for financing conservation. That's true that for the moment, we do not see in, well, the Conservation Trust and with whom we are working, many initiatives for offset or for carbon financing and things like that. It begins, and that's true that in some projects we try to support this initiative, like in the Combo project, for example, in Madagascar and in other countries. But again, it's quite important to continue in this way. The second thing is probably to mobilize more intensively the private sector. And for that, as it has been said, I don't know if some of you were at the launching ceremony of the IUCN Congress, but Christine Lagarde from the Banque Centrale Européenne, she said that to have financial institution and to have private sector on board, you have to show impacts. So that means that you have to improve your monitoring, reporting and verification process. So to be able to see concretely what are the impacts in terms of ecological aspect, in terms of economic and in terms of social dimension. So that's quite important, and I think that the CTF has to progress in that sense. Conclusion, well, operational conclusion for AFD. It has been said we invest in general in the early stage of the creation on the consolidation of Conservation Trust Fund. I think that we have to continue to do that because we are able to have leverage effect. We are able to find other co-funders to come with us to support CTF. So probably AFD as the FFEM could have to continue in that sense. Second thing, just to recall, as it has been said, that we are able also
to intervene at different stages on when the conservation trust funds are already in place. We are able to provide other funds, of course, and we are able also at the early stage to put money in the seeking fund, so to be able for the CTF to prove their capacity to provide funds for the protected areas and to have results from the grant. It's quite important. And the second thing is to support also some studies, some technical support, as it has been said again, for innovation, financial innovation, advocacy, capacity building. And we did that with the Red Lac Cafe, with the Red Lac Network, and with the cafe networks in Africa. And I think that we have to continue. And one of the projects like that is with the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. Emmanuel Fourman, which is our point focal, the man most important in AFD regarding conservation trust fund. He did a great job with the FFEM for this crab project in the CBF, which is really to improve the capacity of the different trust funds in Caribbean Sea to have funds coming from different kind of resources. Third point is to increase our national our contribution to national, regional CTF, and we are quite agree with that answer. We'll try to do our best to have more funds, more grants from the French ministries to be able to provide funds to the CTF. And just to say that we are providing funds for national, regional, but now a new perspective is also to be able, and that's the case already, to provide funds to global CTF. And for example, AFD provides funds to the Blue Action Fund, which is a global fund for the marine protected areas around the world. And we will probably provide funds also in the Legacy Landscape Fund, which will be a very big funds at the global level to provide funds for the main important protected area around the world. And these two initiatives, it was with the KfW, which is, as it has been said, the main donors regarding conservation trust funds. And we try to do our best to continue to be the second. On last point, just to recall that we've got a specific position as AFD because we are able to work, of course, with CTF, but also with the public bodies, and in particular the administration. So we are able to support the public policy to challenge our partners in the public sector to do better in that direction, and also with the CTF, who have a very big importance in some countries, like it is the case again in Madagascar, but also in Mauritania, on Ivory Coast. So for them to be able to better catch the private sector on board. So it's our challenge to continue to be at this level of dialogue with you, CTF, and with the public sectors. Thank you again. And now I think it's time to go on questions, and we will try to respond.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, and thank you to Beryl and Benjamin and David for the presentation. And now I don't know if we have some comments or questions from the audience. It's now time to take a first round of questions. And okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy Plumtree. I head the KBA Secretariat. I was wondering when that comment about monitoring and whether you've been thinking about linking with other IUCN standards such as green listing, whether if you want to green list a site for its management, part of that involves you have to monitor some of the key species at the site. So there's potential additional funding that can support that. Similarly with the key biodiversity area approach, if it's a site key biodiversity area, you know the species you need to be monitoring. We're also setting up a monitoring program. So there may be a way to sort of share those goals and come to a cheaper way of funding it all.
Yeah, definitely. It can be completely. I don't have the. Yeah, it's true. It's completely matching with your need and with the interest. There is a mutual interest to develop mainly methodology and funding for national autonomy on this aspect of monitoring biodiversity and simplification of indicators that are relevant for showing the results. This is an issue because CTF do not have a big staff, and the national bodies also, they don't have full capacity. So it's interesting to work on which key indicators, the minimum one should be monitored regularly, and how to finance this. So to dedicate finance to find ways of reducing cost and mutual work, yes.
Thank you. Okay, another question.
Thank you. Caroline van Leenders, the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture and Nature. We are working very hard on the new global framework with the CBD. And I was wondering, do you see opportunities that this new framework could help you out with standardizing the whole question on monitoring, on what to measure, how to measure, how often to measure? So, because, you know, we probably want something that can be comparable. So do you see opportunities there?
Guillaume, tu peux répondre? Yeah, we looked at how the the co-benefits, the mutual benefits on biodiversity and climate were addressed during this monitoring aspects, and by CTFs also in funding the PAs. And if they were looking at this, so on the climate aspect, the CTF are looking themselves it looks like an opportunity for them to get new finance. So there is a trend of new subject going to climate into PAs in general and CTF as well. About these indicators of co-benefits. I don't know if you say this in English. Mutual benefits. There is an issue to find again a way of simplify a battery list dashboard of indicators that could be easily monitored. And on a long term, of course, there is an issue for you and for the PAs and for the national bodies to have this. But there is a work to be done in this additional aspect of mutual benefits of activities in biodiversity conservation and climate. Indeed, yes.
Yes, perhaps just to add a few words. We all would like to have a unique indicator for biodiversity, but unfortunately it is not possible like it is the case for the climate change. So definitively we will not have it, but that's true that, as I said previously, to be able to measure impact, we will need to have, well, probably a framework much easier to explain to our, well, different counterparts, as I said, the ministries and things like that, just there to be able to show that when we are well, financing CTF, we will have result on the ground. And that's true that for the moment, we do not have comparable indicators from one country to another, or even in one country. Of course, when you are working in wetlands, it is not exactly the same when you are working in forestry ecosystem or in marine protected areas. So definitively it will be complicated, but I think that we have to find some solutions to be able to provide well, information regarding impacts of CTF.
I want to say good morning, good afternoon. It's David Bowery from the Northern Rangeland Trust. We've community conservations in Northern Kenya, and we always talk about community resilience, sustainability, et cetera, and this trust fund. I mean, just looking at the numbers you've got there is very exciting, but mostly it's around protected areas. What about the areas next to protected areas? That's making sure that protected areas can be functional and viable short and long term. We talk about indigenous communities, et cetera. So to your point, we're talking about a matrix, how you can do your M&E reporting to be functionalized so you can be sexy for your donors or for bilaterals and privates, et cetera. So if we can set up a matrix like that to get financial resilience, sustainability for communal areas, I think all of us will be in a better place for conservation short and long term. We've got Madagascar, we've got some amazing projects you've lined up there, and it's exciting to see what it has been achieved. But we're always thinking scale, what next, how to do it, and especially looking at community conservation. So if we can create some kind of matrix around that, I think we're going to take this to absolutely the next level. But thanks, and please, can we send that around? We're super excited about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gaëtan Ken from Bastel. I have one specific question regarding the financial return. 3.6 or 3.7 financial return, I think it's not that bad. And I was wondering whether this financial return was calculated only on the endowment fund capital investment, or including also sinking fund or other financial mechanism. Because, well, we see that there is a trend of decreasing attention of donors vis-a-vis endowment funds, with more attention paid to sinking fund right now. And what's the evaluation, looked at the what the comparative advantages of these different financial mechanism of the CTF they mobilize?
Yes. Thank you, Gaëtan, for this very interesting question. So yeah, it can be true that sinking funds are now well considered in some geographies, and like for instance in Med Fund, there's an event beside anyway. So but I tend to think that the sinking fund remains quite marginal. Endowment funds are definitely more used over the world, and including, if you remember the graph I showed earlier, the sinking fund was a really small portion of all the funds that were used and invested on the field by the CTF. So the financial returns that we the number 3.8 that we gave earlier is for the endowment funds, and we haven't noticed any big variation within the returns of sinking funds versus endowment funds. So it's quite technical, sorry, but for your information, the CTIS is actually covering this distinction at a global level. So if you're interested, you can always read one of the reports, and you'll see that it's roughly the same. Yes, yes, thank you.
Thank you. I think we had one question, one virtual question, if you want to sum it up. Thank you.
Sure. There was a question. Sorry, you have a question too? All right, there was a question from online. Just this is Stephanie Belna, who is asking about the endowment funds and how they're. Do the boards give guidance on how the investments are made to make sure that the money that's being invested and producing the returns is not harming the environment in contrast to the objectives of the fund?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Stephanie, for Belna, for this very interesting question. So yes, the board and the board members are actually responsible for what the investment, which investment will be made by the asset managers of the conservation trust funds. So, but it's when we discussed earlier the list of exclusions, so some investments are prohibited, but they are not always very easy to monitor. So that was one of our conclusions. So we also recommended maybe to keep on using those list of exclusion, but also using some other indicators or indices like ESG, which is more commonly used by asset managers, and I think it will make life easier, and it will probably be easier to monitor the ethic aspects of investment policies, sorry, led by Conservation Trust Fund.
Nani Ratsifa from the FAPBM in Madagascar. My question was for the AFD, because you mentioned the global CTFs where you're investing, and I was wondering if AFD would be looking in the future into linking those global CTFs with the national ones, because you said we need to scale up, and I think that we can scale up to a certain limit by attracting new donors, but it's also about scaling up in the landscape and not just looking at the protected area, but someone said it already, everything that's around, but as a FFEM, we would not be able to do that. And so it's really looking at how we leverage other investments around the protected area. And I find the idea of linking with the CTFs, like the legacy fund, quite and could be interesting. So it's just a thought.
Okay, thank you for this question. I don't think that it is, well, it could be concurrence between some conservation trust fund, but probably more between conservation trust fund at national level. And that's true that now I don't know exactly the numbers, but I think that there is more than 15 CTF in Africa. And so that's true that for donors, as we have important constraints regarding our grants, it's not possible to provide each year, well, new grants to all of the CTF, sure that. But after that, between global and the national CTF, I think that the idea is not it's more to be complementary. And probably the Legacy Landscape Fund, they will finance big protected areas, very big protected areas, which is not already the case for the National Trust Fund in general. And they will finance projects on protected area in countries where you do not find conservation trust fund. For example, the first protected areas who will be funded by the Legacy Landscape Fund, it will be in Zambia, it will be in Zimbabwe. I don't remember exactly all of them, but in countries where you do not find national conservation trust fund. But definitively at our level, AFD, we will continue to support national conservation trust fund and probably to go also on global fund like the LLF or the Blue Action Fund.
And just one more point, maybe in the case of Madagascar, it would be very useful to think in terms of debt restructuring and debt for nature swap, because it would obviously, and it's happened in the past with Tani Mevad, another Malagasy CTF, but there are new, well, let's call them opportunities because the context is so difficult, but this is definitely something that could be done and that could also transit through FFEM. And also RED Plus similarly should also be considered possibly at a national scale, so even outside of the protected areas or at least in the buffer zones of the PAs.
Thank you. I think we're coming to an end. So if I'm keeping 2 words from this session, I think that would be the need to scale up with lots of different types of mechanisms, innovation and so on. And second, the need to measure impact and to find a way to measure impact, keeping in mind that it's not only the conservation trust funds that are in charge of measuring impact, but they can really provide an incentive and help the whole system at a national level. So thank you, thank FD and FFEM for this evaluation. I think the report will be published, the full report will be published in November, so keep your eyes open. Thank you to the consultant and the conservation trust funds. And of course, thank you to all the national administration, the rangers and the communities on the ground, because if we're discussing high-level mechanisms, that's the one who are doing conservation at the first place. Thanks.
Thank you.